there, everybody. It's Mike DiLisio, and welcome back to the next installment of my top 50 games of all time here on the Dice Tower's 2021 Spring Spectacular. All right, well, look, we're covering numbers 20 through 11 now, getting into the higher echelons of the list. I'm really excited about these games. Let's get started right away with number 20. My number 20 is Root. Now, Root is an asymmetrical game where you are woodland creatures battling it out on a particular, well, it doesn't have to be a forest map, but it can be. And the original base box was not a game that you could play solo. The first expansion came out with a solo variant that I was not a particularly big fan of. I was not recommending that as a solo game. But they have since released what's known as the Clockwork expansion that has automated bot characters that are so much better and make this a very, very viable solo game. Root is a game that can be a little bit difficult to teach as a multiplayer game, and so I love having the option of anytime I'm in the mood to play Root, I can grab Root with the Clockwork expansion and battle it out against one of these pretty challenging Clockwork bots that are all card driven. So if you're in the mood to play and you don't have people around, here's a great chance to do it. But also, if you do like playing Root with a group, what this allows you to do is try out the different factions and get better at them and learn their strategy. So I think Root is a fantastic solo game now with the Clockwork bot. I think it's a great game in general, one of my favorite games of all time. I'm really, really happy that they are continuing to add. Many of the factions are already now in Clockwork fashion. They're going to continue to add more. Really, really good solo game. That is Root. At number 19 is Nemesis. Let's just put it out there. Nemesis is Aliens, the board game, okay? It's not officially, but that's what it is. It really feels evocative of Aliens. You wake up out of cryosleep and you're on this spaceship and you don't remember where anything is, so you're having to move around, exploring locations, turning over tiles to find out where things are, trying to get out alive, get back to Earth alive without getting destroyed by the xenomorphs, who could be anywhere. And when you move, you're making noise, and that noise might attract the xenomorph. It's a game that evokes the feeling of paranoia and terror that you would expect so well, even as a solo gamer. You know, a lot of times it's hard to pull off this feeling of fear in a board game. It's a little bit easier to do if there are other people around because you can feed off of each other. As a solo game, it's especially hard to pull off, but Nemesis does it really well. It's a game that really kind of evokes this feeling of terror. Every time you flip over a tile, something can happen. Every time you reach into a bag to find out if a xenomorph is there, it can create some terror. It's a big, lavish production with beautiful, well, I don't know if I'd call them beautiful. The minis are beautifully done, but they're nasty, xenomorphs. But it is a really, really satisfying experience. Cinematic feeling game. That's Nemesis. At number 18 is Cthulhu, Death May Die. Now, there have been tons of Cthulhu-themed games out there. You might say there have been too many. Maybe there have, maybe there hasn't. But Cthulhu, Death May Die, I think does it in a particularly campy way. And I appreciate that. This is a game that's not taking itself too seriously at all. Basically, it's a cooperative game, and what you're doing is you control a couple of characters that each have their own abilities. They're going to allow them to have specific strengths and weaknesses. And the way the game works is that it's episodic, okay? So you play a particular episode, and that's going to have its own deck box. It's going to have cards. That's going to determine kind of how the map is laid out and what different scenarios you're trying to accomplish. And you also pick a great old one to go against, and it has its own deck of cards. You shuffle those together, and that's going to be how your scenario plays out. And so it's really interesting. You in a particular scenario, you might be having to deal with fire that's popping up everywhere. You might be having to kind of almost do like a pick up and deliver type of mechanic. But all the while, you are dealing with this great old one that you know you're going to have to defeat. It is incredibly challenging. Very challenging, but it's a game that just keeps me coming back for more. I've played through most of the scenarios now, and I just keep coming back for more. I really, really think that this is a game that has grown on me. The first time I played it, I liked it, but it has gotten better and better and better. And to me, that's a sign of a great game, is that when a game gives you a good first impression, but the more you play it, the more you find hidden depths, revealing things that you didn't necessarily see, strategies that you didn't realize were even there. Because you might think this just comes down to dice rolling, but it doesn't. There's a lot more strategy here than it might first let on. That is Cthulhu, Death May Die. All right, number 17 is Petrichor. Hey, have you ever wanted to play as a cloud in a board game? Petrichor has got you covered. That's right, you're a cloud. This is a really cool game where it's an area control game. I call it a dual area control game because there's two different aspects where you're trying to control areas and get majorities. The main board is made up of tiles that are laid out in a 3x3 grid. And you are a cloud that is moving about this grid. And the cloud can get filled with raindrops that are these beautiful glass beads. And when clouds meet each other, they create thunderclouds, and these raindrops may spill over. You're playing weather-themed cards that allow you to take different actions to move your cloud around, maybe to spill water out, to put more raindrops in your cloud. And you're trying to water these crops that are going to give you different points, and they need different scoring requirements. But you basically are trying to get area majority on those tiles. And you're also trying to get area majority on this weather board. Really, really unique theme. It's at its heart, it's a Euro game. But it's so unique and such a beautiful design and such a beautiful theme, I think. And the AI is controlled with a deck of cards that's very, very easy to administer. I absolutely adore Petrichor. I think it's kind of one of these hidden gem games where a lot of times I ask people if they've played it, they've never even heard of it. I really think that you should check it out if it appeals to you at all. That is Petrichor. Number 16 is Viscounts of the West Kingdom. Now this was a tricky one for me, because Viscounts of the West Kingdom is part of a trilogy of West Kingdom games that started with Architects of the West Kingdom, followed up by Paladins of the West Kingdom, and the most recent one is Viscounts of the West Kingdom. All three of them play solo. All three of them are outstanding solo. So why did I choose Viscounts? Well, I think I chose Viscounts because of the three, I feel like it has the best realized AI card-driven deck. Okay, it's essentially it's got a deck building element to it. It's got a kind of a circular type board that you're moving around. You're trying to build your deck to complete different things around the board. You have an AI opponent that's going to be focusing on a particular thing. So maybe this particular AI opponent is going for manuscripts, and so you know that they're going to be better at getting manuscripts. So do you compete with them directly on that, or do you kind of concede that they're going to get the manuscripts? I'm going to try to do better on everything else. It's a game with a lot of interaction points. And so that's what's most impressive to me, is that with a very simple to administer AI deck of cards, you can control a game that has this much interaction to it. A game that you wouldn't necessarily think would work well solo. It works beautifully solo. Again, all three of these games are great. I could highly recommend all of them, but I'm putting Viscounts on the list because I think it has the best AI deck of the three games. All right, my number 15 is The Bloody Inn. Now, I'm going to come right out there at the front and tell you that this has a morbid theme that may not be for everyone, but I don't think that it's taking itself terribly seriously. I think this is a very tongue-in-cheek game. But essentially in The Bloody Inn, you are the proprietor of an inn, and you are trying to lure people to stay in your inn so that you can murder them and take their stuff without getting caught by the police. Yes. It's an awful, awful series of things you're doing. But again, I don't think that it's taking itself terribly seriously. But what it is a very, very clever card game with multi-use cards where you are trying to manipulate and get the most points. And it's also got a unique kind of closed economy where you can never get more than a certain amount of money. You have to manipulate that in a particular way, trying to be clever with how you're getting your money and not wasting any of that money, not getting money that goes to waste. Really, really clever game. It has, I think, some beautiful art. Again, this is a little bit divisive. Not only is the theme divisive, the art is divisive on this one. So while The Bloody Inn might not be for everybody, it's definitely for me. I like it a whole lot. Number 14, The City of Kings. Now, The City of Kings is a big, sprawling production, a beautiful game that I think when you see it on the table, your expectations might be different than what the game actually is. When you see it out on the table, it might look like a dungeon crawl type of a game. But it's really not necessarily that. What the City of Kings is, to me, is a puzzle game. And I've said a number of times on these videos that puzzle games, to me, are inherently well done for solo experiences. And in the City of Kings, you are playing as characters that are moving about this map that is made up of different tiles. And you're exploring these tiles to see what's on the other side. And what you might encounter might be some enemies. You might be encountering some places where you can gather resources, things along those lines. You can play this game as a campaign where you've got a series of linked scenarios, or you can play it as I tend to play, which are as one-off scenarios, one-off puzzles. And one of the things I like so much about the City of Kings is that it gives you different experiences. So if you want to play a combat-driven game, you can take a scenario that's combat-driven. It'll tell you right there that this is a combat-driven scenario. Or if you want to play a pick-up and deliver style game, you can get scenarios that are like that, or a resource management game. It's a very versatile system that is a series of very, very clever and satisfying puzzles to solve. And sometimes the puzzle, you might think, oh, I know what I need to do to win this. And you find out it's something completely different. You go, oh, this is what I should be doing. I really like games that let you feel clever like that. The City of Kings is definitely one of those. Number 13 is SOS Titanic. SOS Titanic is a small card game that is really a riff on Solitaire, that classic solo card game. I think this is based on the Patience version of Solitaire. There's multiple versions of Solitaire. But it's themed around trying to save passengers off the Titanic before it sinks. And the way that that is represented in the game is with a spiral-bound book that every time you flip a page, because when you have to reshuffle the deck of passengers, the deck of cards represents passengers. When you have to reshuffle the deck of passengers, you flip a page on the book. And it shows the ship slowly sinking into the water. And so that evokes this feeling of pressure and stress and panic. And I got to get these passengers onto lifeboats. And it's done with the classic system of trying to play numerically so that you can get a line of cards that you can then kind of clear. And in this case, clearing them means putting them onto the lifeboats. You have a character that you are controlling that has a special ability. So that's really the hook that makes it a bit different from just standard Patience Solitaire. A really well done game that has unfortunately been very, very difficult to get a hold of, out of print for years. However, I am understanding that it is getting reprinted, I believe, this year. And I'm thrilled about that because I think that this is a really cool game that everyone should check out if they're interested at all in just playing Solitaire, if they're interested in the theme. Really cool game, SOS Solitaire, or SOS Titanic. Maybe it could have been called SOS Solitaire, who knows? All right, number 12, Dune Imperium. Dune Imperium is a mixture between a deck building game and a worker placement game set in the universe of the movie that has not been released yet, Dune Imperium, but the larger Dune universe. This is a game where you are obviously using cards. I say obviously, but it's not obvious. They're multi-use cards. The cards will allow you to either gain resources, do actions, or they will also allow you to go to particular areas on the board. Different areas have different symbols, so you need to play a card that has that symbol to allow you to go there. But what you're trying to do is a number of things. You're trying to gain favor with the different houses, gain influence with them. That will, by moving up these tracks, will give you different abilities, will potentially give you points. The way to win the game is 10 points. So every point in this game feels precious. To get a point is a big accomplishment. And you get those points both through sometimes playing cards, but most often through moving up these influence tracks and by winning combats. So this is a game that in many ways feels like a standard worker placement Euro. However, it is one of the most interactive Euros I've ever played because you've got this combat element as well. And so normally in a worker placement game, the main points of interaction are going to be, hey, don't take the spot that I want. But in this one, not only do you have that, you've got this combat, which is almost always going to give you at least resources that you need, but sometimes points. And in the solo game, you play against an AI deck. Now, in the game box itself comes a deck of cards, very simple to administer, very simple to handle the AI's turn. You can also get an app that will allow you to kind of do some of that for you. Basically, it'll just flip the card for you. but it's a really, really satisfying game in general. I really like the game, and I really like it as a solo game. That is Dune Imperium. All right, the last game on this list at number 11 is Monumental. Monumental is truth in advertising because this is a massive box, a huge box, whole bunch of components. Depending on which version you get, it might have a whole bunch of minis or it might be cardboard tokens. But regardless, Monumental is a game that is really built around a deck building mechanic where you've got a grid of 9 cards that you lay out that represent your city. And what you do is you pick a row and a column and you trigger those cards. And those cards are going to do different things. They might gain you resources, temporary resources that you can use on that turn. But what are those resources going to do? Well, they're going to allow you to do things on the separate map that is built out of these kind of, they're not exactly hex tiles, but they're hex-ish type tiles that you build out according to a particular book that tells you how to lay out the map. And you've got your troops on that map. And you've got the AI's controlled troops on that map. And you're trying to send out explorers. And you're also trying to have battles and fighting against NPC characters and against your opponent. And this is also done through an AI deck of cards. Monumental, I think, is a really, really impressive design. It has something that I think I've never seen before, which gives me a macro-micro feel. In other words, when I've got my deck, or excuse me, my grid of 9 cards there, that's my city. That's kind of my micro level thing. I'm doing things here to go to the big macro overhead view on this big map. I really like kind of that shift of my attention from here's the row, here's the grid of cards I've got to deal with. How am I going to best manipulate this grid of cards to go over there to that map and do what I need to do? Really, really well done. The solo game, I think, is really well done because depending upon which civilization you face off against, because you play as a civilization and you face off against another civilization, depending upon what civilization you play against, they're going to have particular strength, and you know that at the beginning of the game. So you have to take in mind, well, this is a particularly aggressive civilization, or this is a civilization that is really good at science or technology or whatever the case may be. And so you have to account for that. Really, really, really well done solo game. That is Monumental. Whew, all right, that's another 10 down. I've only got one more video to go. Hopefully you have enjoyed these so far. Hopefully you continue to enjoy the great content that we're providing here on our Spring Spectacular, and I can't wait to see you on my last list for my top 50 solo games of all time.